What is going on, all of you lovely people? I want to welcome you to the Discovery Post Show. It's going to soon be known as the Lore Masters Podcast. While we wait for this to get to everyone so we can have the thousands of people that I know will be watching us, let me let you guys in on a couple of things. Don't forget to check me out on twitter.com/lore reloaded. Special thing on Twitter, if you join me on Twitter right now, it is actually free to join me on Twitter. They're not going to be charging you. And hey, always and forever, if you want to check me out, you can also check us out on patreon.com/Lord Reloaded. If you want to become a lore master, don't forget to rate, comment, and subscribe if you are watching in the beginning. But now that we have people filtering in, we are here to just, and I also have Facebook, facebook.com/Lord Reloaded as well, though I haven't gotten that set up, so you should go there and mock me because it's still very, very old. But that's not why you guys are here. You're here to discuss the longest name on Earth for a Trek show, which is Magic to Make the Sanest Man Go Mad, which started out as a really very strong show. But Michael, as always, I ask your opinion first. Overall, and again, we're going to get into all of it, so don't get too far. How did you like the show?
Well, I do have my traditional cup here that I just want to demonstrate. My overall opinion is that I think that the writers of this show had a good idea, and then unfortunately they then crapped all over it. So that's, I mean, they did start out very strong. I would say the first act of the show was probably the best we've seen of Discovery so far. The second act of the show was just crap. I mean, I have some nitpicks with the first act, but the second act is really where it fell apart. And the conclusion was, well, the way that they resolved the situation with Harry Mudd was okay, but everything else about it was just kind of meh.
See, and I'm kind of on the same boat, though I was actually kind of looking forward to this because I thought you and me would probably disagree greatly, again, before they got to the part that both you and me rolled our eyes out. But let's just hit it one by one, just going down. When you get to the exception of, I think, the unnecessary romance piece, I do think that it was a pretty strong episode. In fact, if they remove that altogether, I would say it was a really strong episode, in my opinion.
You remove all the stuff where they saved the day with the power of love.
I don't think they saved the day with the power of love. But yes, including the power of love. But let's just get it started. So it starts out with her talking about being an outsider still, trying to become a part of the crew, yada, yada, yada. That I'm not too mad about or upset about. It makes sense for her backstory. But let's jump into the 23rd century rave, per se. And I think you even called it the 23rd century rave.
Yeah.
The more I think about it, I'm of two minds on it. I do agree with you when you bring up the fact that they're on a ship during a time of war at a point when they could be needed, especially a ship that can jump anywhere and could be needed at a moment's notice to save anybody or anything. So having your officers, especially two of your senior officers, well, at least one. We don't know if Michael's a senior officer, but we'll assume she is.
Well, she's a bridge officer,
yeah.
so that inherently makes her a senior officer on the ship.
So having two bridge officers get drunk probably isn't necessarily the brightest thing. Now, someone may say, well, they didn't drink. They looked like they were drinking. Anyway, I don't know that it's the best idea. But I didn't really get too crazy upset about it. What are your thoughts on it? Let me ask you this. What are your thoughts on it for a time of war? Because I think I know what you're going to say. But let's say they weren't at war. What would your thoughts be at that point? I love the visuals of it, especially when the outside looking into the ship. I thought that was cool, even though that could give away the ship's position. But still, I think that's really interesting. But what are your thoughts on it?
Well, first of all, the way they shot it and everything, it felt it was a frat party in space. They were playing beer pong. And it just... and again, I know that this is something that all of us longtime Star Trek fans kind of get hung up on, and I understand why some people say that we take it too far, but it's just inconsistent with Trek as a whole. They have had social gatherings in, I think, pretty much every other Star Trek series, but with the exception of Deep Space Nine, but that's a very different environment, they weren't frat parties in space. This is the kind of thing that, I mean, when you're talking about an active military vessel in a time of war, you would not be doing this, period. It would be something that you would do if the ship was at a at a port where people had some leave time to get a break, and that's exactly why even during times of war, naval vessels will get brief leave time. That's why we have shore leave. That's where the term comes from. And the idea that they're just literally throwing this massive party where everybody is getting, I mean, Tilly was fall down drunk. And that's just absolutely ridiculous to think that an officer that you may need on duty because of a pending attack any second is okay to get fall down drunk. Now, I know by Next Generation era, they come up with the excuse of synthahol, where they say that, like if you're drinking synthahol at 10 forward, but when you leave 10 forward, the effects immediately leave your system, so you can be sober in an instant if necessary. However, prime timeline, original series, synthahol didn't exist. In fact, one funny moment in The Next Generation is when Scotty got his first taste of synthahol, and he's like, what is this crap? Because it wasn't real scotch. It was synthetic scotch. So it's clear they don't have it. And I'll give the writers some props here, because I was seriously expecting someone to say synthahol. Because they're so inconsistent with the canon on this show. I was seriously expecting synthahol to be mentioned as an excuse for them to be able to deal with the alerts that were going on and the attack by Harry Mudd. Although for some reason Tilly did manage to sober up very, very quickly, but they don't explain it.
You love jumping ahead. You just love jumping. So speaking on Tilly, I get that she was drunk and that I question that during a time of war on a ship that can go anywhere that's needed on a dime's notice. I agree. I don't get too upset about it overall. I get that it's not what we do now. It's not what normally would do. I don't know. I think it just kind of goes with the wagon in space or whatever, the old cowboy outfit, because I think you could see that in the cowboy, what they would do then. But if we take away just that aspect of it, like always, I think Tilly did well. I liked Tilly overall in this. Again, we learn more. She's a good foil to Michael. I think she's good at bringing Michael into being what a human is, being relaxed. Overall, I like the dynamic, and I liked how she is a foil to Michael herself. And we learn about what she likes. Apparently, she likes being in a band. She likes musicians.
Yeah,
that was a funny part too. I thought that was hilarious when Stamets says, "Look, there's a guy in a band." I thought that was hilarious.
And by the way, let me point something out, because Mr. Pete was in the chat was saying that they would sober up pretty fast in a war. Also, it's one thing you might suddenly realize the situation is serious, but if you are that intoxicated on alcohol, you can't just instantly get your reflexes back and be able to walk straight just because you have an emergency situation. It does not happen.
Sure.
And so that's not being. I mean, if you want to be consistent, Tilly should not have been in the hangar bay scanning the alien life form and helping them figure out what was wrong, because she was too drunk to do anything like that. And like I said, and the thing is I mean, even in the original series, I mean, there was an episode of the original series called Shore Leave, and there were several times where the Enterprise would go to some starbase or other place where the crew could then get a break off of the ship. You don't just have massive parties on the ship. That's not how it works. And especially in a time of war, that's ludicrous. I mean, you could get away with something maybe if it was peacetime and there was some kind of special event, but it doesn't seem like there was any reason for this party other than to throw a party.
Oh, morale. Gigi Simmons says she's not an officer. They made that point in the episode. So the only thing I'd say to that is most of the people in there are officers, and they were also drunk. And beyond the fact that she's not an officer, she's on the most important ship in the fleet that needs everyone to be working at 100% at a drop of a hat, because at a drop of a hat, a Klingon could attack at any point. They even said that this ship is the reason they're winning. So that would be my counter.
Well, And here's the thing. I know you and I talked about this briefly before, but this is an ongoing problem with the character of Tilly. I don't hate the character of Tilly, don't get me wrong. However, it makes no sense that first of all, she's the only cadet on the ship, apparently, and she is a cadet serving active duty on a starship. None of that makes any sense. In prior Trek, when we've had cadets in any kind of wartime type of situation, whether it was Wrath of Khan or certain episode, like there was an episode of Deep Space Nine where a bunch of cadets took the other Defiant class ship into Dominion space. These are not sanctioned Starfleet missions, and particularly in Wrath of Khan, it was a training mission that went awry because a genuine emergency came up. Cadets do not serve active duty because cadets are in Starfleet Academy. When they graduate from Starfleet Academy, they are ensigns. Even Wesley Crusher was an ensign on Star Trek The Next Generation. He was only a cadet before he graduated from the academy. Once he graduated and he came back, he was Ensign Crusher. And then he had his weird relationship with the Traveler, but that's a whole other story. The way they're doing this, it just makes no sense. She should be an ensign. And I mean, that's the only way it would make any sense for her to be serving on the ship. If she's brilliant or something like that, they could have fast-tracked her. But even like when Patrick was saying acting ensign, yes, an acting ensign is someone who is not through the formal training yet, but is serving. You don't have cadets serving, period. It makes no sense. Why is she a cadet? There's no reason for it. Why doesn't Michael Burnham have a badge? There's no reason for it. There's just these things that they throw into the show that, nothing to do with canon. It just doesn't make sense.
I think this is why people may not appreciate you as much as I do, Mike. The fact that she doesn't have a comm badge, not comm badge, but insignia, I'm not too broken up about it. So we do know that 10,000 people were lost. They gave us that. We never see the war. That was brought up. Again, this is kind of days of our lives in space, and I hate that because I'd love to see the war. They do a lot of show don't tell, and I hate that too because I'm told that the Discovery...
They don't do a lot of show don't tell.
Yeah, I'm right. They do a lot of tell don't show is what I was trying to say. They talk about how the Discovery is doing all this and how it's winning the war. I don't feel any of that because I'm not seeing it. I mean, they give us like 3 minutes during each episode, if that, to show how the Discovery is doing. I'd like to see that a little bit more. There was one thing too interesting. They showed someone who was in a wheelchair on the Discovery. We discussed that a little bit. My only concern, it's a warship. It's the most valuable warship in the fleet. Like you said, he probably might have maybe been recovering or whatnot, but I can't see them having people who aren't able to serve at their full diligence, right? You'd never see that on a U.S. destroyer.
Well, and funny enough, they actually, even in the original series, Captain Pike, after he was injured, he no longer served aboard a starship. You don't simply have somebody who's been injured to the point where they're completely incapacitated serving. A person in a wartime situation, if they are injured with some kind of they're paralyzed or something like that, which is what it appeared with this one officer, they would immediately be sent back home. They wouldn't be continuing to serve unless their job would be completely unaffected by the fact that they had, become paralyzed. Now, that's always a possibility. They didn't really know. But we did get, from Ash's toast to the group, he made it very clear that this guy was injured in the line of duty. This wasn't like he was injured when he came onto the ship. And so I don't quite get that, but that's another thing that just kind of like with the whole having an ensign serving active duty, having Burnham out of uniform without having an insignia. And by the way, I understand that they put the rank on the insignia. Someone pointed that out in chat. However, you could simply have the insignia with no rank emblem on it because there's pips on the insignia to indicate rank. They could have simply given her an insignia with no pips on it. And she does technically have rank now because she is a specialist. And for those of you that don't know, in the military, specialist is in fact a rank. And so if she is a specialist now, she should be wearing a badge.
Okay. Yeah, he says rewatch. She says she has no rank. Okay. But like you said, if she is a specialist, she may. And I think, like you're saying, it doesn't really necessarily make or break it. It's just one of those things that brought up.
And let me respond real quick to what they were saying about rewatch it, where they said she had no rank. Yes, they did say that, and at that point, her not having the insignia, I had no problem with. Until I don't remember if it was episode 5 or episode 6, where Lorca made her a specialist. She is now the science officer. She is now a commissioned officer and a specialist, regardless of whether, she had no rank when she came on the Discovery, but she does now.
So they're called up. So she has this interaction with Lieutenant Ash, who is not, by the way, a spy, no matter what anybody thinks. Lieutenant Ash.
He's a Klingon.
He's not. She has this interaction. The chemistry there is fine. I think the actor who plays Lieutenant Ash does really well playing an outgoing guy versus Michael's very reserved TNG-like Vulcan interpretation. And then, so they get called to the bridge. They meet up with Lieutenant Stamets, who I love that actor. I love the way he plays. The fact that he's just like goofy and silly at this point. Just because like something's off. It was really cool. I love his interactions, and you can definitely tell something's wrong with him at that point. So they continue going on. I thought that interaction was good. Then they get up to the bridge, and they're like, "Oh, look, here's a well thing that we never see, 1 in 50, right?" And Lorca does what I would expect anybody to do in a time of war. Was like, "Oh, that's interesting. Well, let's just get out of here and let it be on its way." But I have to say, I can see a lot of people having issues with this, and I can almost, I don't know if you're going to have issues with this, but I didn't mind, especially with this ship, because they find this space whale, and it's very rare. And they want to take it, and they want to put it in a preserve because it's so rare. I think that a organization that was dedicated to science might still want to do an action like that, even though it wouldn't make the best sense in a war scenario, especially with this ship that can go anywhere it wants at any point. I mean, they just drop in, drop it off, and then get back among their merry way, right? I think it kind of shows the actual science part of the Federation and how they're still scientists, they're still explorers. What are your thoughts on that? Because I didn't have a huge issue with that.
I think the space whale thing, again, didn't make a lot of sense given what the Discovery is. Think about this. Let's suppose that we have an experimental destroyer out patrolling the Persian Gulf, and they come across an injured blue whale. Well, then what they would probably do is, if there was a research ship in the area or something like that, they would say, "Hey, you got an injured whale out here, you might want to help them out," and then go on their merry way. They would not stop operations and take the whale to a zoo or something like that and then get back to their mission. They mentioned it in the same episode that the Discovery is the key to winning the war. And so it makes no sense that even if a space whale, which is an endangered species, happens to lurk by, that you would actually take time away from your Federation survival critical mission to save a space whale. I don't think it makes sense. I think that it's, again, inconsistent with the writing. If they wanted to say that the Discovery was primarily a research ship, which they tried to hint at that early on, but that's clearly not the case, unless you just consider the research is that warp drive. But if the Discovery was a science vessel, if this was not a war show, then yes, I would have no problem with them stopping what they're doing and rescuing a space whale. But given the nature of this show, that doesn't make sense. And given the character of Lorca, it doesn't make sense. I could see Lorca saying, okay, fire phasers. Well, no more whale. Let's move on. To have them actually stop their mission to save a whale, I don't buy it.
I could see Lorca being resistant to it. I agree with that. I don't See, here's the thing about Starfleet. Starfleet is not your normal military. They aren't. They never have been. Even in the Dominion War, they took the Defiant, a ship built for war, and did science experiments with it. I forget the name of it, but the episode they were testing. They were doing some kind of scientific experiment that wasn't towards the war. It was just a scientific experiment to do a scientific experiment, and they made part of the crew small. They took a shuttle and took it into the anomaly, which made them like a foot less than a football size.
Right.
And then the Defiant was attacked, and that was the show. They saved the Defiant because the Defiant had actually been taken by the Jem'Hadar. They'd actually taken it over. So them still doing science, I think, is Starfleet. I know it's not a normal military, but I do think it's Starfleet.
I would say this, and I understand why people argue that because of the way Gene Roddenberry and some of the other producers of the show want Starfleet to be, but it also makes no sense. And that's why what is, for most people, considered to be the greatest Star Trek ever produced, namely Star Trek II and Star Trek VI, are the only two films where the Starfleet is portrayed accurately as a military organization. And the problem is that when we you can't have it both ways. You don't have the United States Navy out there with ships that primary focus is research. Now you might have the Navy out there assisting with research. You might have them doing charting. You might have them doing all sorts of stuff that involves some science. But to say that Starfleet is primarily a scientific thing, it's kind of silly. Again, it's the wishful thinking of the utopian vision of Roddenberry to think that, we don't need a military, we just need happy scientists out there patrolling, and they just have weapons in case some meanies show up. And that doesn't make sense. It really doesn't. And this is a war show. And so to do it on a show where the whole premise, because even Deep Space Nine didn't start as a wartime show. That happened later on. With this, the whole premise of the show is about the Klingon War. And so to try and say, to say science in the middle of a war show doesn't make sense. That would be like if you were on a United States submarine and, look at those endangered species. We need to go help them instead of continuing on our mission to fight this war. That does not make sense.
Right. Well, Kit brings up a good point too. He's like, let's take a creature evolved to live in deep. Kit Coyote says, let's take a creature evolved to live in deep space and beam it into a pressurized hangar deck.
Yeah, that makes sense.
That made a good sense too.
I noticed as soon as they beamed it in, it looked like it collapsed under its own weight. Because it's obviously a creature that's used to living in zero gravity. So that doesn't, it made no sense.
Mr. Lundell says, Lore, the shrinking episode was an accident. They weren't intentionally shrunken. Yes, actually they were. I'm not going to get into a debate with you. I'll encourage you to go watch it. They even talk about it before they go into it, about how they are going to shrink themselves. That was a crux of the beginning. And they even point out this has no point about the war. This is what we were supposed to be doing anyway. I would encourage you to go look at it. I promise you I'm right on this.
And by the way, I think Patrick is correct when he says that if science was Starfleet's main focus, then every captain would be a science officer. I think that's correct. Every captain should be a scientist if the primary mission of Starfleet is science.
No, that's a different skill set. Running a ship, being a captain is basically being a manager, managing a ship. Different skill set. So I would disagree with that. But so they transport.
Tell that to Janeway. She was actually a scientist.
Yeah, because everybody knows.
I'm not saying Voyager was a great show, but it made Voyager was a science vessel. Voyager
it was a deep space combat vessel as well. It was post-Dominion.
It was never meant to go on long. Voyager was never meant to go on long-term missions. That was the whole point of the show, was that they were stuck on the other side of the galaxy, and there was not a ship designed to go on long missions.
The ship was also designed for combat. They talk about it in the show. I promise you, it's a post-Dominion War ship. I'm not saying it's not primarily science, but the ship definitively was designed for combat as well.
But Captain Janeway was a scientist first.
Okay.
And
she made some great decisions. Let me.
I'm not saying she was a horrible captain. Don't get me. I'm not defending her record. What I'm saying though is that she should be the norm. as opposed to she's the only captain we've seen whose primary job was science. Every other captain, their primary job was either politics or military. And so it doesn't make sense that that Janeway should be the norm, not the outlier.
Okay. So they transport the creature aboard. Of course, as he said, I didn't even think about that at the time. Meant for deep space. Let's put it in a pressurized room where it's specifically built for humanoid survival, not necessarily the creature itself. And they begin scanning it, and lo and behold, you have Lorca walk out of it. Now, I had just gotten done... Mud. I'm sorry. You're right. Mud walking out of... that creature, I promise you, whoever put that creature together got done watching Stranger Things, because the mouth of that looks exactly like the mouth of the creature in Stranger Things. And so he walks out. I enjoy Harry Mudd, and I know that you're going to say, well, it's fine to enjoy the character, but it's not Harry Mudd. I get that. When it comes to continuity and stuff like that, unless it's just brazen, I'm letting all of that go. But I like Harry Mudd. This iteration of Harry Mudd, I think he is a great villain for the show, in my opinion. So he walks out, he's all cocky, starts shooting and killing people. I really enjoy him in the show itself.
But you see, this is the same problem that I had with the Klingons, particularly in the first couple of episodes, but the Klingons as they've been portrayed overall, is that if you're, it's one thing to say, okay, here's a scoundrel, evil character that we're gonna do this stuff with, and I'm not saying that this Harry Mudd that we've met is a bad character. I actually do. I agree with you on one level in that I do think he's an interesting character. He's kind of fun to watch. On the flip side, if this is not like Battlestar Galactica reimagined, this is not a reboot of Trek, at least not according to the producers. This is supposed to be in the Trek timeline. And that means that this Harry Mudd is supposed to be the guy that we then see 10 years later encountering James T. Kirk. And just like, if you look at the J.J. Abrams Trek, while there was the changes in the timeline that created differences, you can see that Kirk, Spock, McCoy, Scotty, all of them were based on the characters that were in the original series. You could see that in them. You can see traits in them. They had, with one or two exceptions, they had a decent physical resemblance, and they actually acted, for the most part, consistently with how their original counterparts would have acted had the situation changed. In this guy playing Harry Mudd is nothing like, one thing that Harry Mudd is not in the original series at all is bloodthirsty. Yes, he is incredibly narcissistic. Yes, he will do anything to get ahead. But he's not the kind of guy that would sit there and say, I will bring you down, Captain, and I will destroy your ship, and I will kill you. And it did not make any kind. It was not at all, the same character. It's just not. And I don't understand why. I do understand. You didn't grow up with the original series, so to you, Harry Mudd is not a character you really cared about. But if they did that to, say, Captain Picard, or where, let's say that they show up and they say, okay, this is in the same timeline as Star Trek: The Next Generation. It takes place 10 years before the first episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation, and they bring in an actor to play Captain Picard, and he looks, sounds, and acts like Inspector Clouseau from the Pink Panther. After all, that's more French. Now, would you accept that as being in the same timeline?
No.
Well, that's what they did.
So I don't know. Again,
I like that. Patrick Jest. Harry Mudd is the Jack Sparrow of Star Trek in the original series. That's a great way to describe it.
from what I've seen one episode of him. Mostly, there was a couple parts I missed on it, but I don't know that he's the Jack Sparrow. Maybe he's the downgraded. Maybe Jack Sparrow's an updated Harry Mudd.
Well, yeah, but they're similar characters. Jack Sparrow is a scoundrel. He's narcissistic, and he would do anything for himself. But he's not a killer. He's not ruthless. He's not pure evil. And actually, like Jack Sparrow, they played Harry Mudd for laughs in the 3 times that he appeared, twice on the original series, once in the animated series. But they always play him for laughs.
Sure. I like the character. I understand that you don't like that he's Mudd, but do you like if it wasn't Mudd, you said you liked him beyond that?
Yeah, if it wasn't for the fact that they keep calling him Harcourt Fenton Mudd, I would love this character. I think he's, and the thing is, I mean, he actually makes a good foil to Captain Lorca. And that's the thing, is that this is a well-crafted character, and I can't remember the name of the guy from The Office that's playing him. I always forget his name, Rain. He is excellent, and he's really, he's into that. He's doing a great job with it, but it's not Harry Mudd. Just like these are not Klingons. It's something totally different. And these writers, and the thing that angers me about this show is that even though the production is improving and I'm liking the show more as it's going on, which is typical of Trek. I mean, let's be realistic. With the exception of Deep Space Nine, pretty much every Trek had a crap pilot, and a lot of the Treks, and even Deep Space Nine, their first season was the weakest, with the exception of the original series, where actually it was the 3rd season that was the weakest on the original series. But but that's consistent. I mean, this show is improving, and I'm glad to see that. I like to see that it's moving in the right direction. But what I don't like is when they keep spitting in the faces of the true fans by trying to, take things that are in the timeline that we're supposedly in, and then completely screwing them. I mean, when have the Vulcans ever been bloodthirsty? When Harry Mudd, when was he ever a bloodthirsty, crazed guy? When were the Klingons, whatever you want to call these things? None of that makes sense. I
don't know if I'd say, quote unquote, true fans. I think anyone who's a fan is a fan. I don't believe in no true.
Well, when I say true fans, oh, please, this isn't a political debate. What I'm talking about is people that love classic Trek. And when I say classic, that doesn't just mean the original series, but this show is supposed to be a direct prequel to the original series. It's supposed to take place in between Enterprise and the original series, and much closer to the original series and Enterprise. So if you're going to do that, while you can update the visuals and make the consoles look better and make the visual effects look better and all that, which I'm fine with all that, but you can't mess with the core characteristics of various species and specific characters. You can't take Sarek and make a character that is directly contradictory to Sarek, which they did. You can't take Harry Mudd and make a character that is directly contradictory to Harry Mudd. And that's why I'm saying it. You're screwing with the fans who know Sarek, who know Harry Mudd, and are like, what are you doing? It doesn't make sense. I've
come around on the Klingons, but so here's my question for you though. When it comes to Mudd, how does he know about the special ship? That's just something they seem to gloss over?
Right. Well, Harry Mudd seems to know a lot of stuff that you kind of wonder, where did he get the knowledge? Now, you could say, okay, he got some information on Discovery from Lorca when they were in the Klingon prison, which, okay, I'm fine with that. But now, and again, they seem to be being inconsistent with their writing. Michael Burnham was known as the person who caused the war with the Klingons, even though that was a misunderstanding, because she didn't cause the war. And in fact, her presence was almost irrelevant. The war would have started exactly the way it did, regardless of what she did. She was a mutineer. That's what she did. Now, you could say, and sure, she killed the torchbearer, and then she killed their messiah, but that in and of itself didn't cause the war. The Klingons were already set to start a war. That was their whole goal in the first episode. So no, I don't think she actually did any of that. But now she shows up, and of course I love this about, well, I love it in a way that and meaning that I hate it, but I laugh whenever I see it, is one more time where they try to make Michael Burnham, they want to tell you how awesome she is.
Don't jump ahead.
Well, you asked me.
Calm down. By the way, 33 people watching with only 17 likes. Like it, people. I want to see 33 likes. Or whatever, 17 plus, how many ever dislikes?
Or dislike.
33. Yeah, whatever. So, I the one-liners I think with Mud were good. She said, where Michael says, "You're mad," he says, "No, I'm Mud."
That was good. Yeah, I like that one.
And he had a couple other good liners too.
And you know what? You could have made this Mud's brother. That would have been fun. Instead of Harry Mudd, make it Larry Mudd, his brother.
I loved. The other comment that I love that made me laugh is like so many ways to blow up the ship. It's almost a design flaw.
Yeah.
Which he was kind of pointing out that Federation ships like to blow up a lot. One thing I did like about this episode a lot is that I think it gave Stamets time to I want to say sparkle. Not he. It was
Sparkle?
a good Sparkle. It was a good character growth.
Is he a Twilight vampire now?
Yeah, no, time to what's it looking for? Time to shine. There we go. It gave him time to shine. I thought his character did really well. I really enjoy this character, especially since he's ultimately the hero here.
Well, Stamets again is like I was saying before. So as far as I'm improving the show, he is one of those things that's really been an improvement to the show. His character at first felt to me like, especially in his first appearance, he was like, oh, he's the token gay character now. And then, and of course, they had the whole thing where he had his gay partner that got killed, but then he's shacking up with the other guy, and it's like, what? But now they've fleshed him out a little bit. Now he's an interesting character.
This is why I get downvotes and people yelling at me in comments. Just
hey, you still don't have any downvotes, so whatever. Maybe you'll get one now. We'll wait for it in a second.
It's going to be the people coming looking for a fight once this goes live. Why?
No, but here's the thing, what like for example, when Stamets was talking to, there's your first downvote. That was funny.
From you, I'm sure.
But actually it wasn't me. But when Stamets had his little talk with Burnham about romance, I thought that was a touching moment. Now, I don't think it fit in the story, but I thought it was a touching moment. It was a good character moment for him. I really like what they're doing with this character. The last couple of episodes for him have been really good. And and see, now the downvote's gone. See, whatever. The thing is that when these characters were the token whatever, like they were at the beginning, I despise them because I don't like gratuitous content in any show. Now that they're actually fleshing out the characters and making them more interesting, I don't care about the fact that he's gay or straight. Yeah. That's irrelevant to me. But I don't want him to just be, oh, he's the gay guy. Oh, look, there's the black guy. Oh, look, there's the Asian. No, I don't care about that. What I want are these interesting characters. And Stamets, they are making into an interesting character. Lorca, they're making into a really interesting character. Unfortunately, the rest of the cast, not so much. I mean, they've toned down Michael a bit, but she's still, to me, not an interesting character. Tilly is okay, but she's got a ways to go. She's still a little flat to me. Not much depth there, but she just kind of seems like the dingy character, I want to see Michael get writing like Stamets is getting and like Lorca's getting. I want to see a real character arc in Michael, not just, oh, look how great she is.
Well, I don't know that they were token to begin with. I did think it was in your face. It was agenda-driven outside of...
that's the whole point. That's what a token is.
I disagree. But I do like... I love Stamets. He's my favorite character so far. And I think I really like how he's done. So, moving on with the show. So you have Stamets, and he's the only one that's aware. Now, here's something that's interesting to me. Stamets is the only one that is aware, and it's because he's not in the time continuum. And I get that the show's focused on stopping Mudd, But at some point, you would think they might want to say, hey, it may be an issue at some point, the fact that you're not a part of our timeline. How is this going to negatively impact you? And I would have loved to seen them at least discuss that towards the end. But again, it's not necessarily the biggest issue, I guess. I like. So this is obviously a rehash, right? Of what was it? You brought it up. It was a TNG episode. I'm sure they've done it on other episodes.
Where they were caught in a time loop and the ship kept blowing up, and then they had to figure out a way to avoid it. Right. There was another ship captained by Fraser Crane that kept crashing into them. But I get stuck on which episode that was. And of course, there have been movies about it too. So I mean, whether you're talking about Edge of Tomorrow, you're talking about Groundhog Day, it's not like this is an original concept. But I do like the fact that it was driven by a villain as opposed to just some event that they had to figure out a way out of.
Well, and I liked the different times. Every time they redid it, I liked the changes they did. You know what I'm saying? Like how the different points, how they went through. I also liked...
Yes, thank you. Cause and effect. That's the episode.
I also like how they made it seem like this had been done anywhere from 50 to 100 times. In that TNG episode you brought, and in other ones, not like Groundhog Day, but in episodic, like 30-minute to an hour, non-movies, it seems like it's done like 4 times or something like that. You only see the times where they do it like 2 times they get it wrong, and then they do it the right time. This, the way they did it, it made it feel like they were getting it wrong a lot and that it happened a lot. And it really felt like that. I really liked that about that episode. See, here's the thing about this episode. We're about to get to the problem with it. If there's like 7 to 10 minutes of footage that if they removed would make this a really good, where I would tell Michael he's crazy. This is modernized Trek. It's good.
Well, let me say one thing about the time loop aspect. And this is something I actually really appreciated about it, is that the first time we see Mud and the ship blows up, we find out that it's not the first time. Because right there when he first does it, Mud is already talking about how he's had this conversation with him a dozen times before. And now he's got the new information he needs, and he'll see him next time, and blows up the ship.
Stamets even says that. Not to interrupt you, but Stamets even says that the first time we see him do it, he says we've already been through this.
Well, that was on the second run that Stamets said it. But on the very first run, we just see Mud looking at the computer monitor and saying, "Oh yeah, that you've said that before." But
anyway,
and I like that. I like the fact that we didn't have to see the first time it happened. We just join in when it becomes relevant, when Stamets is figuring out what's going on, and that way we don't go through like on the Enterprise episode, or the Next Gen episode, where everybody was getting deja vu, and that's how they figured out that something was going on. This one, Stamets figuring it out makes sense, given and that's what I like. That's where the good writing on this episode is that if you go into a time loop, character that's exposed himself into this multi-dimensional spore crap would be able to detect what's going on just organically. And I like the fact that they're using what they have on the show to move the story forward, as opposed to the trope would be on this show to have Michael figure it out somehow. So I'll give him credit there.
Right. I did like it. And that kind of moves into, and I'm showing it on the screen right now. I enjoyed this standoff where he puts up the shield. You have Michael and Michael and Lieutenant Ash.
Ash.
Run in, and he's trying to figure this out. And he's like, "Hey, it would really help me if you could just tell me how to work this thing." And they fire on him. And of course, he has the shields up because he owns the computer. And he's just going back and forth about how he doesn't figure out what it is. I like that back and forth, that charisma he has. And then he gets popped by Stamets, which I thought was funny. And Stamets they're like, "Well, can you stop the explosion that's about to happen?" He's like, "Yeah, I haven't figured that part out, but I'll see you guys soon." And then it moves into, and I don't know, this is maybe a jump, but we discussed this before. I liked how many ways he killed Lorca. It made it seem like it was one entire shot as he was circling around, and he kills Lorca in like 6 or 7 different ways, including beaming him into space. and all kinds of different things. And I liked that shot. Again, I think this is a solid episode, except for what we're about to get into. But yeah, I would suggest watching it, if not for those pieces. Again, the way he killed Lorca multiple times was just ingenious.
My only real problem with Mudd's plan or Mudd's efforts here is that, okay, I think they established at one point that there was like some 52 attempts by the time we get to the like second or third of the last one. So he's been doing this for, since it's a half hour each time, he's been doing it for about 25 hours. And, okay, that's fine, but there's no explanation as to how he manages to, in a half an hour, because he has to do it in just a couple of minutes, take over the computer system of the ship completely. That there's no explanation for that in the episode. It doesn't see, it seems like he should have a method of taking over the computer. Even if it was just a throwaway thing, like it was something built into that wrist thing he had, I would be fine with it. But it seems silly that he could just instantaneously take control of the computers. Well, and that nobody would realize.
I think they discussed it on the Beta Z thing, because he said he had talked about how he had taken over or stolen from a Beta Z bank.
Well, they just said that he did it, but they didn't really say specifically how.
That he used the technology for it, is what I thought.
Although that's another thing, though, is that now they, all of a sudden they're retconning all this stuff about robbing a Beta Z bank into when he and Lorca were in there, because they didn't. I'm going to have to rewatch the episode, but I don't remember them talking about anything like that.
I mean, he could have mentioned that on the off time. I don't think that was necessarily necessary as a setup.
Yeah, but that was a lot of detailed information there. Although I'll give him this much, because Ash was on there longer than Lorca, so it is possible. But I couldn't see Mudd. If this Mudd seems like he would be too smart to tell someone how he did it, because then that other person might try to get his tech to do it themselves.
Right. Well, so let's get into the piece that everybody's going to love, that really annoyed most everybody, I think.
When they saved the ship with the power of love?
No. So
that's what they do.
They don't. It was convoluted. There was no reason for this love story between Lorca and Ash to occur. Is that there was absolutely no reason specifically for them to have like these moments and whatnot, right? So basically what happens is Stamets knows he needs to get Michael to help him save the ship, because of course he needs to get Michael to help him save the ship. And so he goes through a couple of times trying to talk Michael into it, and I enjoyed those scenes. I thought that was excellent. Excellently done. He would start saying the same thing she was to try to prove to her that he's been through this, and it takes a long time to convince her the first time, and then as time goes on, he's just instantly starting to convince her, like within minutes or seconds. So where it really gets rough for me is where he's like, okay, tell me something you wouldn't tell anybody else. Nobody else in the world. Only I will know, so that I can tell you next time. And she tells him, and he's like, oh God, I'm so sorry. And then
and I was thinking it was something like with her parents getting killed by Klingons or something like that.
Right.
And
then they go back to the rave, and he's like, "You've never been in love, or you've never loved somebody, or someone's never loved you.
She's never been in love.
You've never been in love." It's like, dun dun dun. Oh my God, you've never been in love. Wow, that's such a big deal. So I get that can be something emotional. I can get that somebody might want to keep that, but that wouldn't be the first thing of my deepest, darkest secret that I haven't shared with someone, right? Maybe I feel guilty and I feel like I was the reason the captain died. That might be something, like on the Shinzu, right? But no, it's the power of love. And again, I like Stamets and Tilly. I love how he gets Tilly out of the way every time by saying, hey, there's a musician, a really hot musician over there.
Yeah.
And she runs away. I thought that was great. So then you have to have this, like, she starts talking, and this is where it falls off the tracks. They walk out of the rave, and they talk for the 30 minutes. They talk about, like, love, right?
They saved the world with the power of love. I told you.
Stamets is like, hey, let's start dancing and let's talk about your feelings and let's talk about how you like Stamets and let's just talk about love. And it's like, this, he could be figuring it out right now. This could be the time that he gets it right. Why are we standing?
Well, that's the thing. There's like 2 cycles there where they're focused in on this whole love thing, and neither of them. And my problem with it is that they're not productive. If the whole thing is, Stamets is the only person that can take information through each loop and hopefully improve their chances, but the whole thing with him talking to her about her real feelings and how to possibly cultivate a relationship with Ash and all that. Well, it was a touching character moment. That's what I'm saying. I think that they're doing a good job with Stamets' character, and I think that was good. But it made no sense in the context of the show because she's not going to remember any of this, so it's not useful to her. He is giving her information, so it's not useful to him. And same thing when she has the big romantic moment with Ash and they kiss and everything. It's completely pointless because them having their romantic moment in the middle of all this is not helping them at all, because when the timeline resets, then neither Burnham nor Ash are going to remember any of this, and Stamets wasn't a part of the conversation, which means that he didn't learn anything from it. And so the whole romantic thing in the middle of this episode was 100% pointless. It didn't help them, and it just gave Mudd more time to work on his evil plans.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Every time he does it, he learns something new, and he gets closer to doing it. And all this does, as you said, that could have been the time that when they had the kiss or when they're dancing, that could have been the time he figured it out, got it right, and the Klingons would have won, according to him and everybody on the ship.
Right. So, notice now that we're talking about the space love saving the world, you got 2 downvotes.
Yeah. So... I'm gonna have a lot more within 6 days. Watch, but it's frustrating. It gets in the way. It doesn't add a lot. Okay, cool. We now have a love triangle or a love story between Ash and Michael in an episode that it shouldn't have been there. I'm not against Ash and Michael getting together. Just can we do it when it makes sense and not in this just
and when it's going to have some kind of lasting repercussion, because neither of them remember it.
Right. Well, no, they talk about it at the end because that's what they were told, right? But
right. But that's like if you find out, oh yeah, I understand in one of the reboots we made out. Oh yeah, okay. Too bad we're not in that timeline. All right, let's move on, do our job.
Yeah, let's just continue on, right? So we get past that part, and again, as long as we're talking about, as long as they keep the love piece out of it, it's not necessarily that bad, in my opinion. It does very well. So, moving on from quote unquote love, they finally get towards getting it right. And I do like when Mudd comes onto the bridge, and we actually see him on the bridge, having a conversation and talking with the crew and just having command of it. And so he and there's a subtle part I did enjoy. There was one piece where he brings up the captain's play, his what do you call it, his man cave, and he's showing all of these different ways that he can kill people, because Lorca has a ton of very dangerous things apparently in his room or in his ready room or whatnot, and he has the antimatter balls, dark matter balls, and so he kills Ash. And I think that, to me, if I was on the crew, I would at least question. Well, they probably wouldn't remember it in this iteration, but someone's got to figure it out, right? It's like, you have a lot of very dangerous things. That seems to be a warning sign to me. I don't know. I think that if I'm part of the crew and I know he has all these things, that seems like a warning sign.
Well, you see, here's the thing, and again, this goes back to the inconsistency of the writing on this show, because when Michael Burnham first met Lorca, she refused to join the crew of the Discovery initially because she didn't want anything to do with developing weapons and fighting a war. And then Lorca convinced her to stay because, no, that's not what we're doing. We're developing this cool new warp drive. But then, the next episode, she's creating biological weapons. And now, in this episode, she's talking about how awesome it is that the Discovery, and how she feels like she's a part of this team now because they are winning the war. And so she's basically doing everything she said that her Starfleet principles would prevent her from doing when she first meets Lorca.
Right. Well, remember, she knows all about four-dimensional technology perfected for time travel. I didn't even bring that up. I love... So what is she now? She's
because she's so awesome.
Yeah, she's an anthropologist that knows Vulcan ninjutsu, that has empathies with animals. That
quantum mechanics. She can use the Force. She can fight in the Matrix.
Can beat Cirque in his own mind.
Yeah, and now she understands four-dimensional space.
Yeah, and perfected time technology. Yeah. I thought that was awesome. So, here's the thing that gets me, because I have to watch myself now. I'm so biased against her when it comes to this. What did you think about her killing herself? I wanted to use that against her, like, oh, I'm going to sacrifice myself. But what I try to do is I try to plug and play. So what if it was Stamets or Lorca or Saru that did it? I wouldn't necessarily have an issue with it. I think it should have been...
I honestly think it should have been Stamets. I think that would have made what I would have. I think a better writing, because one thing that the show tries to do, and unfortunately, and this is the problem with the writing, they try too hard at this. Is they keep trying to make her awesome, and by trying to make her awesome over and over and over, and by adding one more thing to the list of a million things that she can do, you're making her less and less interesting. Now, the one thing that Mudd absolutely needed to have in order to make the drive work was Stamets. And Stamets knew this. And so what if, so Ash is dead, she's upset, and this whole thing was just to bring back Ash. That's the only reason she wanted to reset the timeline again instead of trying to stop him right away. And so, what if and Stamets knew about her love for Ash. And so what if Stamets killed himself so that he would be forced to reset the timeline? That would make sense. But to have her go, and even just look at her body language when she does it, she's like, I'm Michael Burnham, because I'm awesome, And so then, all of a sudden, it's common knowledge for, that she's the one who killed the Klingon Messiah. So now she's not the person who caused the war. She's the person who killed the Klingon Messiah, and so the Klingons would pay a hefty penny to get that Michael Burnham, when the Klingons wouldn't even know who Michael Burnham is. Because it's not like when they beamed aboard, she pointed her phasers at the Klingons and said, I'm Michael Burnham, bitch, and then shot them or something. That's not how it went down. Right. And so the Klingons would have no idea who Michael Burnham is. And
tell them Michael Burnham said hello.
Exactly. It's like, that doesn't make any sense once again, because it's like, but if you want to make it flow organically, like they did well with Stamets and his link to the transdimensional drive, if they had him kill himself instead of her, that would have flowed more organically from the story. I think that would have been better if they were in engineering or something, and Mudd was, going to say, okay, this time I got it. And then Stamets could say, well, there's one thing you forgot. And he's like, what's that? And he goes, well, I still have my phaser, and then shoot himself. That would have been cool. I think that would have been a really good moment there. And another character building moment for Stamets, because now you're showing Stamets not only, being one of the more understanding characters as far as how relationships work, but that he'd be willing to sacrifice himself for someone he doesn't even like that much.
Right.
And I think that would have been cool.
So,
but to try and once again make it Michael, and then on top of that, they try to say this dark matter ball, which I did like. Somebody was giggling about that earlier. Yeah, dark matter balls. This dark matter ball is apparently the most painful way to die, right? It's kind of like, remember there was an episode of Star Trek The Next Generation where there was some like illegal version of the phaser that because it's so incredibly painful to get shot with it. So it's like this ball is like the most painful way to die. And when he hits Ash with it, the chief of security, he's writhing in agony and everything as he's dying. But Michael takes it, swallows it, and doesn't even flinch as it disintegrates her because she's just that tough.
I actually have an image of her up with that. I was going to talk about that. And Juan Laureano, who I question if he's even still here, says, the hate for Michael is getting old now, as old as the argument that Orville is True Trick, which makes me think he was just a passerby because we generally don't talk about Orville being a True Trick. I don't even think we ever really said that.
We mentioned it in prior talks, but not on this.
Yeah. And, okay, so Juan Laureano's still here. I apologize, my friend. But, here's the thing. If Michael's going to be poorly written, or if Michael's going to be written in ways that doesn't make sense, we're going to talk about it. And if it wasn't, here's my thing. Here's the thing I would disagree with Michael on. Yeah, the fact that she didn't take it, she wasn't screaming. I didn't like that part. But if they just removed this stupid love triangle, I wouldn't have minded it. And I was thinking while I was watching this, and it was probably because it was more ensemble. Here's the thing. Michael's not that bad if it's not focused on her. I've noticed that. Michael's not that bad of a character if it's not focused on her. When it's focused on her, it becomes poorly written. When it's ensemble, she's at least tolerable.
Well, that's the ironic thing about this show, and I don't want to hate on Michael Burnham because I want this show to work. I genuinely do, and like I said earlier on, is that I see a lot of improvement on this show. I mean, we're now this is episode 7, and I would say that this episode is light years beyond what the 2-part premiere was like, but the weakest link of this show is Michael Burnham. And the problem is that that's also the singular focus of this show. And if they really want to make this show a good show overall, then they need to do one of two things. Either take the emphasis off of Michael Burnham, which they're not going to do, or they need to focus on writing her as an interesting character, not as a Michael Sue. Because every time they give her one more thing that she's awesome at, it just makes people like me want to roll our eyes, because I don't need to see that she's great at everything.
Well, that's my only problem. That's what I was talking about. I actually have to stop myself. They have written her, in my opinion, they have written her character so poorly. And she has had I have such a bias with her now that I do have to sometimes remove her and put someone else in to see if it's truly bad writing or if it's just because I don't like this character because of her background, And that's what I was saying here. And like you said, it would be better if it was Stamets. I don't know that this is necessarily a Michael Sue or Mary Sue thing for her sacrificing herself or not. Because if I plug and play with anybody else, I don't have the biggest problem with, so I'm not going to call it a Michael Sue in this instance. The fact that she doesn't scream is Michael Sue. But,
right. It's not the fact that she sacrificed herself that I mean, because any character I could see with assuming you're trying to write the Starfleet ideal, I could see almost any Starfleet character doing that. I mean, keep in mind that like when Mudd was talking about I'm going to kill everybody on this ship. Khan in Space Seed in the original series did the exact same thing, where he put Kirk in a torture chamber and then was telling them that he's going to kill every single bridge officer until someone gives him what he wants, but they didn't break. The difference here is that Stamets broke. Now, does that make Stamets a bad character? No, because I think that Stamets is at the core of his character is compassion. And he just can't stand to see people suffer if he can stop it. And so I could see that with his character, even though it would kind of go against some of the camaraderie that you see sometimes. But I could also easily see Stamets or anybody else sacrificing themselves. Her not flinching as she swallowed the dark matter balls, that was stupid.
Right. Well, and someone brings up a good thing. So dark matter we call it dark matter because we got no idea what it is. So dark matter as a weapon doesn't make a lot of sense either. I'm not going to get upset about that. I'm not going to get too crazy about that, but that does technically make sense. If we don't know what it is and we don't know how to use it, we know it's there, but we don't know anything about it. How do we weaponize it?
And that's fine because we,
I think that's nitpicky.
In today's physics, no, we don't know what dark matter is. But but hypothetically, 200 years from now, we might figure out what dark matter is, and maybe it is something that can be weaponized, and maybe they'll still call it dark matter at that point. Who knows? But the thing is that like when Harry used the dark matter balls, so the Harry dark balls, when he was throwing, he threw them at people, and then it broke on them or whatever and evaporated them. So what she should have done was just grab the ball and then hit herself with it. But to swallow it, to try and, I guess they were just trying to make like this badass moment for her, and which like we don't need another badass moment for Michael. We've gotten too many of those as it is, and so she should have just broke it on herself, and that would have done it, and then had her keel over in pain,
right?
As opposed to just like. And like you show, right, on the clip just a moment ago, how she's just like staring at him with this glare as she's disintegrating without even flinching.
CBS lawyers who are watching, that was absolutely not a clip. These are still images.
What's a still?
A still, S-T-I-L-L.
Actually, I think steal is actually the better word.
No, it's a still image. I would never steal anything from CBS, nor use any of your copyrighted material that might get caught by Content ID. As you know, images that don't move will sometimes move. Okay. So, yeah, I mean, again, that was a Michael Sue or Mary Sue moment when she didn't like scream or anything like everyone else is supposed to, because it's supposed to be the most horrific way to die.
Right.
And we will take a brief time to let you guys know that you should be liking this video. If you haven't liked it, don't forget to check me out at twitter.com/Lore Reloaded and at youtube.com/Lore Reloaded. I do have a community chat. I do have a community tab. Go to that community tab. Right now we're voting for what the Friday battle breakdown is going to be. Right now, battle at Sector 001, the first contact is winning. You should go and change that if you want to. I have a My Little Pony. I will do a My Little Pony if it wins. We also have the battle at Michael's favorite episode. I called it the battle at the neutral zone because they haven't named the battle, but it was between Kirk and the Romulan. I'm tired.
The Balance of Terror.
Balance of Terror. And they actually, which is strange to me because usually they're really good about naming
if you're going to name, I would probably, if you're going to name that battle, you could say it the battle at Outpost 4 because that's where the Enterprise was when it started.
That sounds better. That's what I'm going to rename it to. But they usually are really good at naming battles. I was surprised that one didn't have one. But getting back into this, so they finally.
And by the way, you should since I come on every Sunday on this show. How come you don't put like a plug for my channel on there?
I put a plug for your channel every time. I've done it for every episode. Maybe not this one, but every one. Check out Anti-Tracker. All you got to do is put Anti-Tracker into the search term. Take a look at it. He recently did a video about how wrong I am, so go check it out. I'm sure he makes the Borg look like magic. So. We don't have time to get into it, Michael. Let's not talk about it. You think the Borg
magic to make the sanest man go mad.
Yeah, exactly. That is just a stupid title. So they figured out what he is going to do. And Stamets, again, they focus on Burnham, but really Stamets is the hero of this because even though he
have a good one, Mr. Pete.
Mr. Pete's out. See you, Pete. Thanks for staying, sir. So they come back and really Stamets has to redo everything, even though he's not prepared to do it, right? So he gets everybody in. They go up. They reset it. They know he's coming, and so they try to trick him. And Lorca, as soon as he walks in, Lorca's like, you know what? You win. Ta-da. And, here's the chair. Do what you got to do. I like that he didn't fall for it instantly, and he still didn't. It took a while for him because he's like, yeah, this doesn't really seem right. And even when they gave the reasons, he was still like, that something still seems off here. And I like that he wasn't an idiot until the very end, which then he's like, oh, well, I'm just not going to look this anymore in the mouth. Let's do it, But I think the way they set him up was done well when it came to the acting itself, right?
The I liked the whole sequence of them. I mean, even though you could see it a mile away that obviously they were on top of it and they knew what they were doing this time around. Especially, so I mean, from the moment that the doors opened and Lorca didn't even look back and said, "Oh, Captain Mudd," then you knew, okay, this is the one. They got him. However, when they tried to explain how they did it, is where that whole thing really, it was cringeworthy to me. And number one, they talked about how they got the information on Stella and her father, because the ship's library of logistics and stuff was not a high priority system. So when he took over the computer system, they could still access it. Fine. But then they said they rewired the captain's chair because the captain's chair was a low priority system. Wait a minute. So do you mean the console that the commanding officer of the ship is the only person authorized to use is a low priority system? That would be the console that would have things like, I don't know, self-destruct. That would be the console that, I mean, it's literally the top dog's console.
You mean
and
the
you're
console
gonna
they use for communications too?
Right.
To send,
and they're saying that's a low priority system that they could hack into, even though Mudd took. No, I don't buy that. I think that what they should have done would be, honestly, and I know this would kind of be a almost a techno-babbly thing, but if they came up with a way to, hey, everybody eat some of these spores, the magic spores that they use for the drive, and you'll remember it, so that then that way.
Idea. I didn't think about that.
Yeah, so they could have said, like the doctor, since the doctor and Stamets are so close, he could have worked with the doctor to come up with a hypo that they could inject some of the spores into all the key members of the crew so that they would remember what's going on and they have their plan for next reset. And that would have made more sense. And that way, when the reset started, before they even started with the space whale, they would have been setting up things on the computer before Mudd actually took over, and make it so that they fake Mudd out where he thinks that he took over, but he didn't.
Well, an interesting thing, too, I thought might have happened. So let's say they didn't do that. Maybe an interesting piece, because they may want to use that later. Again, something is probably going to happen with Stamets, and they don't want to, muddy the waters.
Right.
Maybe before he gained control, because they were working on it before he gained control, they disconnect the command chair, like we said. They disconnect it from the main computer, and then maybe somehow disconnect most of the main functions to the bridge. And then we're able to trick him thinking he's still in control when the bridge doesn't have any of the vital functions anymore. And then, somehow wire it to make it still respond like it did, but it couldn't when it tried to actually use them. Might have been a better way of doing that, because it still makes it seem like he's in control until he's not, and then he tells the computer to do something, and the computer denies it, but they never showed them outwitting him. He still feels like he had control until for some reason he didn't.
Right.
And that didn't make any sense.
Well, and that's the thing. He technically, because the way they described it, he had full control over the computer except for the low priority systems, and they basically tricked him so that when he thought he was calling the Klingons, he was actually calling Stella. But then when he tried to tell the computer to cancel the transport, the computer denied him because now they have control.
Right. I mean, I don't know how they would have done it, but it would have been cool if instead of that they beat him with just the low priority systems.
Right.
Kind of like a Voyager when self-destruct was a low priority apparently, but not suck like that Voyager episode did. But somehow just defeat him with all of the low priority systems.
Well, I think the way to fake him out would have been simple. Is that you do it, pretty much with the low priority systems, you fake them out with the comm signal, and then when they go but they don't spill the beans to them until Stella and her father beam on.
Right.
And at that point, it's too late.
That would have been cool. Yeah, instead of just doing that at that point, that would have been awesome. That would have been really well done.
And I, by the way, I know someone said this right at the beginning. I don't know if this person is still in the room or not. But I really would have liked it if Stella, the first thing out of her mouth was, "Harcourt, Fenton, Mudd, where have you been?" and it'd be right out of when the Android version of her from the original series, and she should have like raised her hand exactly like the android did and said, Harcourt, Fenton Mudd, where have you been? And then instead of having her start to nag him, have her run off the transporter pad and grab him and hug him because she loves him and all that. Right. But I think that would have been a cool way to bring Stella into this. They kind of made it so that you now see that Mudd was obviously lying about Stella being his inspiration, that he was trying to get away from her and just scamming her dad for money, but which is a little more like the original Mudd. But the problem is that it's still just not Mudd. Mudd's not this bloodthirsty evil genius. He's a bumbling idiot that happens to stumble across a couple of ways to try and stop Kirk.
I don't. Oh, you're talking about in the original. I thought you were talking about this because I would not.
This guy's an evil genius.
Yeah,
That's
I wouldn't define him as
smart.
an idiot. Yeah, by any stretch of the imagination, right. I wouldn't at any point define him as an idiot. I liked the back and forth. The way they made seem Stella did not make her seem unattractive at any point.
Right. She was an absolute harpy in the original series, and they should have made her look more like that. I mean, because let's be real,
put down women, to be fair, though.
Well, but that's part of the whole Mudd. And that's the thing is that we're just going to ignore the bad things about Mudd's personality now, because that was part of Mudd's whole thing. He was trying to get away from her because she's this annoying, screeching, nagging, ugly woman. Right, and that's why Mudd hated her so much in I, Mudd, and I'm fine with that, because they're not saying that that's good that Mudd is running away from her because of that. They never say Mudd is a good, righteous guy for that. However, if you made her resemble or at least have that screechy voice when she first sees him, that would have at least given a little bit of fan service, and some of us fanboys would have been a little bit happier about it.
Are you even true fans? You true fans? How'd you phrase it? The true fans? No, you didn't say true fans. What did you say? That was the no Scott?
No, I said true fans early on. Okay. I'm talking about fans of the characters, fans of the classic stories, and I can enjoy this show for what it is, but the problem is that when they do things that do just fly in the face with canon, it takes me out every time they do it. And that's why I would rather have them come up with new characters. Like this guy doesn't have to be Harvey Mudd. He's an interesting enough character without making him Harvey Mudd. You just come up with another space scoundrel and call him whatever you want. But they don't, but since they're going to call him Harry Mudd, then they need to make him consistent with Harry Mudd. You can't, it's like if they bring in Spock, because we know Spock's her brother, and they bring in Spock and he walks in, he's like, hey guys, how's it going? Everybody would be like, what? Because that's not Spock. You got to be consistent with the characters as we've seen them before.
Right.
And the D7 Cruiser is another great example of that. I'm sorry, but there was a comment just now about the D7 Cruiser. If you're going to say that, hey, look, it's a Klingon Flak Nick class cruiser, and you come up with that weird thing that we saw, fine. But you say a Klingon D7, that's a very specific ship with an iconic design, and then you just throw it away.
Look, here's my thing, and that's why I'm being a little bit more understanding. Is I think you just got to let that stuff go. It has to be reimagined at this point, in my opinion. You can't, not have it. You can't not watch it as reimagined.
But the thing is that, okay, the D7 Cruiser has appeared in the original series, Next Generation, Voyager, at least two of the motion pictures, and three, actually, if you count the J.J. Abrams reboot. We actually saw him in the Kobayashi Maru scenario in the J.J. Abrams reboot. And every single time, while they've improved it, they've added more detail, they've made them look nice, but the shape of the ship is exactly the same. Just like the Enterprise is always a saucer, an engineering section, 2 warp nacelles. without exception. Yes, the Enterprise has gone through with the exception of the NX-01, but that was because it was the prototype, so to speak. But from the original series, Next Gen, and the Next Gen films with the Sovereign class and everything, the basic shape of the ship is always the same. Even though I may not like the later versions of it as much as I like the classic versions, it's recognizable.
Well, what's
there's nothing recognizable about their D7 cruiser, their Klingons, Harry Mudd, any of that. None of that is recognizable.
What's cool about Enterprise? Well, what would have been cool is I think I've told you this before. They actually had a plan. There was a reason the Enterprise went out. There was an arc set for the Enterprise going out not ready. And they were supposed to get more and more technology, and you were going to watch the NX-01 actually transform to look more and more like the Enterprise A.
Right.
Which would have been a really cool arc.
You mean the NCC 1701?
Yeah, the NCC.
Not A came in later. Right. That was in the third Star Trek film that came in.
Right, the NCC 1701, the original. Mm-hmm. But they weren't able to do it because of money and bad writing and because Berman sucks. But I mean, the original thing I think would have been awesome. So it would have been really interesting, and I wish they had done it, but they didn't. So, again, just because the others did it doesn't necessarily mean they need to do it. And it's like Battlestar Galactica reimagined. You got to accept that it's reimagined.
No, but you see, this is the problem. This is where that breaks down completely, Laura, is that the Battlestar Galactica reimagined is not pretending to be in the same time frame as the original Battlestar Galactica television show. They are completely unrelated. One is a reboot. It's a completely different universe. If Discovery, if they had come out and said, this is a Trek reboot, I would not be complaining about any of the things that are different from the original Trek. Just like I know a lot of fans complained about things they changed in the J.J. Abrams verse. I didn't, because I understood the separate timeline thing, and the alterations they made were logical for that timeline. But here, they're just completely crapping on canon, and they're trying to say it's within canon.
Right, but you can't. I don't know, man.
And even then, I think Patrick is right. Even the Galactica, the basic shape of Galactica is the same.
But ultimately, it's just.
And the classic Vipers look identical.
It's repetitive to get upset about something that knows going to be changed. That's all I'm saying. It's just that's why I'm not really harping on it as much. It's because, look, I know what's going to happen. It's like, I don't know. It's like when you throw a ball and the dog goes after the ball. You know what's going to happen when you throw the ball, right? I mean, pointing it out, I'm not saying you shouldn't be complaining about it, but for me, that's why I'm not harping on it as much. It's because everybody knows it's a reboot, is what it is. No matter what they say, it's a reboot. Right.
Well, and like somebody, Nexus was saying that, everybody complains at some point about the Enterprise A, B, C, or D, but nobody complains about the J. The J was irrelevant.
Yeah, it's horrific. It was brought in a couple, it
was a horrible design, but the thing is that it appeared, once?
Yeah, once or twice, maybe in Star Trek Online.
And so, I remember it appeared in Enterprise, but, who cares? Because the J did suck, but the J is completely irrelevant. There was no significant story time spent on the J. Right. The Enterprise A, B, C, and D actually each had at least one significant story around them, and really it was the A and the D that had anything significant. And then of course the E, the Sovereign class.
I liked Kit's quote. And I lost it here, but he did the.
It's a reboot. They need to admit it. That one.
No. He did the. I want the Enterprise. No bloody A, B, C, or D. That was a TNG episode. I thought it was
right. That was what Scotty said when he was going to the holodeck to see the bridge of the Enterprise.
Right.
But the thing is, if they had, if Star Trek: The Next Generation was produced by Kurtzman, then when Scotty said that, he would have stepped onto the bridge. It would have looked like the bridge of the Discovery, and he would be like, "Oh yes, it's great to be home," and everybody would be like, "What?" Right. But the fact that they recreated the bridge of the classic Enterprise for that episode, it was great, because and I know people say, "Oh, people won't buy that because it looks so silly by today's standards." I gotta say that's a bunch of BS, because every time, like on Deep Space Nine, the Trials and Tribulations episode is a fan favorite episode, and they faithfully recreated everything from Trouble with Tribbles, and of course used footage from Trouble with Tribbles in it as well, but they didn't try to modernize it. They just showed it for what it was, and people say, oh, the original Constitution class ship would look silly by today's standards. Have you not seen any of the the remastered edition of Trek? The Constitution class ship actually does look pretty good, and if you put some work into it, it can still be a very impressive looking ship. You don't have to change everything just to change it, and that's where the gratuity comes in. Now, on the Federation side, while I think the design of the Discovery itself is just stupid, because it looks like, I don't know, it's a giant triangle in space. It looks like the ship that you fly around in Asteroids, the video game. I mean, it's just silly looking.
The what? Which ship was that again that you said?
The Discovery itself.
Oh, okay.
I think the design of the
triangle in space. You say.
Look at it. That's what it is.
Every time I see it, I see when they were trying to sell. You remember the Enterprise pizza cutter?
Yeah,
I want to buy one of those because that's what it reminds me of.
It's silly looking to me. Now the Shinzo was a cool looking ship. And if they use the design for the Shinzo for Discovery, I think that at least I wouldn't be complaining about the design of the ship. But the thing is that the Federation ships, even with the stupid triangle design, are recognizable as Federation ships for the most part. The shuttlecraft look different, but they look like they could be shuttlecraft from the Federation. The ships look different, but they look like Federation starships. Nothing about the Klingons looks like Klingons. And what the heck was that yacht we saw at the end of this episode?
I was going to bring that up. The yacht that's bigger than the science vessel. That was awesome.
I mean, the Discovery has got to be the size of a Constitution class ship, and this yacht dwarfed it.
Right.
And it literally, I mean, because if you look at it, I know we only see it for a second. I don't know if you can bring up the still image for it, but it literally, to me, looked like somebody took a model of a yacht and then glued warp engines to it.
Right. Hold on.
And it was just the dorkiest looking ship. And people complain that the Constitution class would look silly. I'm sorry, but the Discovery looks silly and the yacht looks silly. And that's just my 2 cents.
Look at those nacelles. It's like, what the hell? I mean, what can that ship do?
I can't see it yet.
The ship can do like warp 15. Well, the people can see it, but look at the nacelles. It looks like let's make the nacelles fucking huge, because that's the way the nacelles work, right? Bigger nacelles make them better. Even though the nacelles are supposed to create a warp bubble, so it doesn't make sense to make them like bigger than the actual ship itself. You should be able to see it by now, but I mean, look at.
But if you look at the shape of the ship, doesn't it look like the top part of it literally looks like a boat sitting on top of a giant warp drive?
Right, but I mean, the warp drive makes no sense in my opinion. I mean, look at the nacelles in comparison. So this is a top of the line Federation ship, right? Fresh off the boat, out of whatever. And look at the nacelles, and the nacelles have never been that huge on any ship that I'm aware of. Even the Negvar, which is this just Titanic ship, I don't think they're that big. So you're right.
It looks like they're like the size of the nacelles on the J.J. Abrams reboot ship.
Were they big? I mean, I don't even think that the J.J. verse were that big. Were they pretty huge?
No, the J.J. verse nacelles were huge, and that was something I remember a lot of people did not like about the design. But the yacht just looks silly to me. The fact that it literally looks like a boat glued on top of a spaceship, I'm like, really? That's what you came up with?
Yeah, I mean, again, this is a nitpick. I'm not getting too bad. It was on there all of like 10 seconds, but still.
But it was just the dumbest looking ship. And if you're going to do something like that, I mean, yeah, we know that they're rich and everything, but why couldn't they just be in a shuttle?
Yeah, someone's asking, is this a perspective issue? To me, it doesn't look.
No, they were side by side.
Yeah, you can see they're side by side right here, and it looks like they're almost an even pace away from the camera. So I don't know that it is. Good writing. The one thing I like, John Wickham says Anti-Trekker is best. He's real. I really like Anti-Trekker. A lot of people give him hate, but I really actually like him. Go check out his channel, John Wickham. If you're not subscribed, go subscribe to this guy.
I'm going to be doing a review of Encounter at Farpoint this
Yeah.
week. Oh, that's a painful
But
one.
here's good writing will ask the question why and how something moves forward, right? So I think when they built the ship, they were like, let's just build a ship that looks verbose, that looks gaudy, that looks like a rich person would own, that, like a yacht. But I don't think this would be the normal progression, in my opinion,
Right, but
of a Federation ship or even any other ship. Because when things are built, they're built in a logical progression of things. I can't see this ship being a logical progression from anything, in my opinion.
Right. But you see, like and the thing is that it's not like we've never seen civilian ships in Star Trek.
Right.
And give me just a second here.
Says, just tuned in says some eccentric rich people plate their apartments in gold, so you could see a gazillionaire might make this. I suppose. Again, this is us just nitpicking. We're not like massively upset about this or anything. It's just having a conversation about it.
If you get a chance, James, I just sent you a picture. That's an actual civilian ship from Star Trek 3. To give you an idea, that was the concept for what a civilian ship would look like. And something like that, I think, would make more sense. And that way, I don't know if you can get that up.
It's going to take me a second, but I'm going to work on it. I'm going to do it for you.
And the thing about the ship design there, and I remember when I first saw Star Trek 3, yes, in theaters, but the ship itself looks Federation if you look at the bridge section, it looks identical to the bridge section of the Enterprise in that era. But it also doesn't look, it looks like it was built in the era of Star Trek, but it does not look Federation, even though it's Earth. And so I like that design because that design is exactly what it needs to be. It looks like something in the same universe, but not made by the same manufacturer.
Yeah, some people are saying it looks kind of Star Wars. That does look a little Star Wars-y to me, but...
Yeah, but if you look at that bridge module, that is identical to what you see on every starship in that era.
Okay.
It's just that it doesn't have the saucer and all that, and the engineering section is built right into it. And so you have the one warp nacelle that takes up half the ship.
Right.
And that ship also doesn't have any weapons. That is a civilian ship. And clean that design up a little bit because you got a rich person. I think that something like that could work.
Right.
But to glue a boat on top of a warp nacelle doesn't make sense to me. But yeah, granted that's a nitpick, but it's like stupid.
It's no huge thing, but still.
And by the way, talk about and this is where I get kind of confused by what the heck are the writers thinking. If you can find that earlier still image you had on briefly, where you saw Stella on the transporter pad. Now, her clothing there looks very reminiscent of what we saw in the original series, as far as what civilians were wearing. And I thought that was interesting that this is the only time we've seen any kind of continuity with clothing, because nothing else has even been remotely close to what we've seen in original series, or anything later. You could argue that the uniforms on this show do look like they could be an evolution of the uniforms from the Enterprise era, but why would they switch from this uniform to the outfits that they wear in the original series? Doesn't make a lot of sense. But I did think that was interesting that they did seem to make an effort to make her look like she was consistent with the timeline.
Right. So just tuned in says, I literally just tuned in. That's funny. Is this primarily a negative review channel? I would encourage you to check out my other stuff. Generally, I do nothing but lore. This is an honest channel, so if we like something, we'll talk about the things we like about it. If we don't like it, we'll talk about the things we don't. If you're looking for someone to praise Discovery every 30 seconds or even 5 minutes, we might not be for you. I can tell you Anti-Trekker generally does not like this show.
Although I with a caveat, I think it's getting better.
I'm
I do
ambivalent.
reviews. He doesn't.
I'm ambivalent towards liking it somewhat, but we are not a quote unquote review show. So, especially if you want us to talk about how awesome it is, and I don't mean this in a negative way, but really look at why you're watching this. If you're here to get the positives about what they pull from it, from Trek and things, I would suggest maybe going to Certifiably in Game, or going to
Steve Shives.
going to Steve Shives, or going to there's another one that I think does a really good job, Trek Pertese, or Trek Yards, because I think they're a lot more positive about it. But that's not going to be this show. So if you don't like it, hey, this channel's not for everybody. I get that. We're going to be a lot more critical than those other channels would be. And that's not to say those other channels are bad or wrong. That's just a different way of we doing it. So I already have it up, what you're talking about, how it's reminiscent, things like that. Angry Mr. Flibble is blocked by Steve. Thank you so much for bringing him up, Michael, or Anti-Trekker. I really appreciate that.
Always glad to help.
Always glad to help. Yeah, thanks.
Well, and here's the thing, though, is that now, and now keep in mind, if you followed me on this channel on our Sunday shows, or if you've looked at my review on my channel of Discovery Episode 1, then you know that when Discovery first launched, I despised it. I absolutely hated it. And now I don't hate the show right now. I think it needs work. I do, but I think it's heading in the right direction. And what we're trying to do is not try to put an agenda on what we're talking about. It's just we're looking at it for what it is. Now, there are...
from our bias standpoint, what it is from
well,
our bias.
It's all subjective. I mean, you either like it or you don't. But there are some people that will color it with a political agenda. For example, there are people who, like Steve Shives, who will talk about how this is the greatest show ever. And this is like, but like some things that, like, for example, when we talked about when Tilly and Stamets dropped the F-bomb a couple of episodes ago, and how I said that was completely gratuitous and unnecessary, people like Steve are literally saying how awesome that is, that they finally have an F-bomb in Star Trek, like that's some kind of achievement to be unlocked. And so if that's what you want, go check out channels like that. Right. But, I'm not hating on the show, but I am hating on the inconsistent writing and the things that they do that directly contradict other Trek. And it's not silly things, not things like, oh, how many gigawatts of power does a phaser bank use? Crap like that I really don't care about. But when you do things like take a character like Sarek, a well-established character, and then butcher him in this show, you make the Vulcan philosophy of logic into warmongering. That doesn't make sense, and that's not nitpicking. That's serious problems with the writers of this show, because it's not like, does anybody not know that Vulcans are pacifists that follow Star Trek? I mean, if you are a casual fan of Star Trek, you know Vulcans are pacifists. And yet the writers of this show don't know that, or know it and are ignoring it, which would be even worse.
Exactly. And Michael, or I'm sorry, Anti-Trekker.
Okay, you can call me Michael.
I know.
It's not like
I like using
keep my name a secret.
And my name's James. I don't keep it a secret either. But I like using your name because then people can search you out. That's why I want to use that instead. Is awesome because I know he just heard like a ton of typing and still was able to talk. Because I mute you guys so you don't hear it. But I'm sure that was very annoying to him just then. Yeah, I just, again, as you said, this specific channel isn't political. I like to keep the real politics out of it. I misstated with Anti-Trekker. He's not afraid of getting into the politics. It's not what his focus is on. But, here's what I like about this. And a lot of people wonder why I do this show with Anti-Trekker, why I do this show at all. You have Anti-Trekker who grew up with the original series, who really enjoyed it, who brought it in his prime, who's very knowledgeable, has watched all these episodes and watched the new ones. When I got into it, it was really TNG. For the longest time, I thought you said Trek as track. I called it Star Trek for years, for like 15 years. And I also thought TOS stood for, I kid you not, the old series. So when it comes to stuff like that, I think he's more knowledgeable, and I had a lot of catching up to do. But me, I came in, I'm a millennial. I came in the next generation. I came in DS9. So I think we have two different perspectives on it, and I like to put those perspectives right next to each other because I think they're two good viewpoints. So that's what the channel's about. Going towards the end, they rehash, getting back into Discovery, the actual show, they rehash.
Let me point out one quick thing, though, because the Rambling Johnny mentioned that not all Vulcans are pacifists. That's true, but what we're talking about is their society in general. And the character of Sarek clearly was anti-war. Spock even called himself, in a quote that I used in my review of Discovery Episode 1, Spock tells Kirk, "I am a Vulcan bred to peace." Surak, the founder of the Vulcan system, argued with Kirk in the episode The Savage Curtain about the pointlessness of war, even when you have an aggressive enemy force. And yet we find out that apparently the Vulcan philosophy has been shoot until they talk to us.
It's just, a lot of people try to defend it. It's apparently canon. Apparently now the animated series is canon too, so I have to go back on that. Paramount for the longest time, and CBS for the longest time, because Gene Roddenberry didn't want it to be canon. He had a huge issue with it, and Paramount said, you know what, okay, we'll do that. And ever since Discovery came out, they've changed their minds on that. Thanks again, Discovery. But where was I going with this? What was I saying before that? What was I saying, Michael? What was I saying before I got on?
You're talking about canon.
Well, that just makes it all better. Oh, it just doesn't seem logical. Yeah, it doesn't seem logical to me that Vulcans would automatically assume after the first hit you're going to attack every time after that. There are so many other integers that they you would think that they would have considered. Maybe there was a faux pas they did that they don't have to do next time that doesn't involve shooting. Maybe there was a miscommunication. Maybe it was an accident on the Klingon side. They don't know this race. It makes no logical sense that after the destruction of the first ship, automatically we're going to blow the hell out of... Because what if they did that with the humans? Humans are known to shoot first and ask questions later, but we are nowhere near what the Klingons are. But after we destroyed the first Vulcan ship, they would have started a war. Makes absolutely no sense. They don't know who this race is. This is first contact. It's just, but you know what? Paramount says that this is canon, that Discovery says this has happened. I try to keep to canon on my episodes as much as I can, and if they say it's canon, then I have to put it at canon. Now, I look forward to doing a redaction video when all of a sudden this is Mirror Universe, and they go to the real timeline, which would be cool, because I would love that, but it's just stupid, it's not logical, but it is canon, it is what they did.
Here's the problem, and that would be a clever twist if this whole thing was Mirror Universe, with the problem being that they made no mention of the Empire, they have mentioned the Federation. If they were careful, and this is where it would require some good writing and where I think it would actually work, is if they carefully avoided saying Federation at any point, and you can do that. I mean, they could just say Starfleet, because right. And
that would have been a clever writing. I never thought of that. That would have been very clever.
If they just mentioned Starfleet Command, they never mentioned the Federation, right? And they go through this whole thing, and they also, and this would again require some foresight on this. They just put Discovery on the hull, not USS Discovery, so we don't have the conflict of USS versus ISS. Well, and because the Discovery is an experimental ship, it doesn't have that on there. And so if you take that into account, and so you write your way around that, then you could have the big reveal at the end that this is the Mirror Universe. And then you could say,
God, well, how awesome would that
wait. And it goes better than this, because it also fixes a lot of the problems that I've been complaining about from day one, which in a large part is the technology involved. If this were the Mirror Universe, their technology should be more advanced at this point because of the events of the Tholian Web, where a Constitution-class starship was sent back in time to the Mirror Universe at the time that the NX-01 was flying around, which means that they had technology 100 years early, and that means that the Discovery would be the product of reverse engineering that technology and improving upon it for 100 years. And now they have far superior technology than anything the Federation has. Now let's invade the Federation, and we see at the end of this season the Discovery leading the charge against classic Constitution class ships. That is how I would write it if this was a mirror universe thing, and I think that could actually be really cool. And in fact, what you could even do is make that at the mid-season break where they charge through it, and then we see the USS Discovery, a Constitution-class ship, with Michael Burnham, with Captain Lorca, but now we have the good version of them looking down the barrel of the evil Discovery. And you all of a sudden, and that would explain Harry Mudd's differences, that would explain the technology differences, that would explain the Vulcans, that would explain the Klingons, it would explain everything, but the problem is that they blew their wad with saying Federation, Federation, Federation. And they blew their wad with showing USS, USS, USS on all the ships. Now, but that would be a really cool way to do it, is that now we've spent half the season getting to know the opposite of our character.
Right. Well, and what might have even been more interesting is, let's say they wanted to keep these characters, but they wanted to turn them to like the good guy version of it. Then maybe at some point, instead of having them charge through to attack, maybe there's a phenomenon like we saw with the Enterprise C, where the good version of them come through. They get destroyed somehow, maybe by a Klingon attack or whatnot, and they go through the rift as them, and then they try to... I think that would be interesting. Someone asked, and then we're going to get towards the end of this, because I know people need to sleep. How'd you write it if this was Section 31? I know you really... I don't think it's Section 31 anymore, but if they were Section 31, how would you have written it? The Section 31 thing, I think, is still pretty possible that we're going to see that. The black badges, they were clearly hinting at it. The NCC 1031, they're clearly hinting at it. But the problem is that since episode 3, we have not seen the black badges at all. And we've also seen Lorca being somewhat held accountable by the Admiralty at Starfleet, which means that if he was Section 31, he would not be reporting to anybody's admirals at Starfleet, because he would be reporting to the clandestine admiral over Section 31 alone. But we've had multiple, obviously Discovery is single-handedly winning this war. It's not like it's a big secret. So I would, number one, you could have, I can't remember her name, but the one admiral that we've seen multiple times now, she could be the head of Section 31. We could see no other ships from regular Starfleet interacting with the Discovery. And I think you would have to also make sure that you show... Suru makes no sense. You would need a reason for Suru to be on the ship, because he clearly would not voluntarily join Section 31. Tilly would make no sense. You need to have you have to have every character on this ship in on it. You don't have a Section 31 ship where only half the crew is Section 31 and the other half don't know it. I mean, you could still maybe have Lorca as Section 31, but you couldn't have the ship themselves.
Well, the problem that you run into is that all it takes, if you have even 25 people on the ship are Section 31. All it takes is that one of those stupid frat parties that they're throwing now on the ship. Raves. One of them gets a little too drunk and starts saying, "I love Section 31. Oh, sorry," and now the cat's out of the bag. And so I think that if this were a Section 31 ship, another thing you would do is I would have in the first 2-part episode where on the Shinzo, I would put Captain Giorgio and Michael and Suru in classic Trek uniforms, the tunic and pants. And then on the Discovery, they can be wearing those nifty new blue uniforms because they can say that's a Section 31 uniform. And that way you can get away with the modernization, but you can also establish that this is in the Trek universe and everybody else is wearing outfits like Captain Kirk.
Right.
And you could explain away all the technology.
Right. The only way I think it works is if it's JJ verse. I think Section 31 up until Section 31 up until maybe mid or end of TNG, but definitely DS9. I didn't see as really all that powerful or having that much influence or sway. But in the JJ verse, they were basically the Tal Shiar without everybody knowing about them.
Right.
They had installations. They were underneath libraries. When we meet, when we learn about Section 31, there's no specific place they meet, that it's just a group of people, right? And one person brought something up that I think works, that Sloan wasn't necessarily like the boss or anything. He was just...
he's just an agent.
Yeah, and he was probably a specialist when it came to... it would make sense if they made him specialists. Like you had a Dominion specialist, a Romulan specialist, internal affairs specialist, right? So I think he was more a specialist when it came to those things. But in JJ verse, I could see them having actual ships because of how powerful they are. They have their own admiral for all intents and purposes, right? So I don't think it's Section 31. I agree. I really wish they had written it the way you did, because if they had done that, all of this hate, I would eat it all at the end.
I would too.
I would have said, you know what, I'm absolutely wrong. This is Trek the way Trek is meant to be done. Please go and watch this entire thing, because I was absolutely... And I would have loved to have seen that. Maybe they'll still do it. Maybe they'll somehow pull it out of the fire.
And I know some people, a couple of people have mentioned it in the chat already, that the mirror universe isn't necessarily the only parallel dimension and everything. That's true, but we also know that, first of all, they've said that the mirror universe is going to be in this show. Which is fine, but if you're going to enact the mirror universe, for the sake of continuity and everything, it makes it more interesting if we revisit the Star Empire. And in fact, it makes it interesting if we see, because the mirror universe was really cool. And in fact, I heard one person, I can't remember who it was now, wish I could, where they were saying what would be an awesome reveal would be to have Michael on the bridge of the Discovery in either the mid-season break or at the end of season 1, and they, Sarek and his son, because they always like to refer to Spock as his son for some reason, are coming on board the Discovery to visit with Michael, and then she goes, "Oh, it's I want you to meet my brother," and the door opens and you see Spock standing there with a goatee.
Nah. That'd be cool.
And everybody would be like, "Holy crap!" That would be a great reveal. But the problem is that they, like I said, they blew it by calling things USS and referring to the Federation.
Right. Again, maybe they'll pull it out of the fire. I don't know. So, getting back to the show itself, it actually ends with them talking about the relationship and Michael being standoffish, and Lieutenant Ash, who is not a spy, nor Vok, saying, "I'm willing to wait," blah 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 blah. I don't care that they're making a romance. I don't like romance in my science fiction. I don't think it's necessary. I think it's from an era where science fiction wasn't respected, and you had other writers trying to make it respected. But I don't care if you're going to have it in there. But it didn't need to be in this episode. Like, if they removed everything except for maybe the start, where she said, "I'm finding myself more and more liking hanging out with him," and then just let that go, and then they could build on another episode,
Right.
I think...
Well, I'm not opposed to the relationship per se, except that it doesn't seem to fill any necessity. I know that Captain Kirk always gets the reputation for, love him and leave him and all that. But it's usually because most of the time when Captain Kirk was in bed with someone, it was because he was either trying to get information or he was trying to trick them into thinking that, he was loyal to something he really wasn't. He was basically doing it in the line of duty. He was like James Bond, and that served the story most of the time. With Picard, it was really more of a romance thing when he would do it. Sisko had the tragic lost love, which was a driving force for him. So there's a place for it, but yeah, I think that is there a reason to have Ash and Michael in a relationship? Now, here's again, depending on how good the writers are, I know a lot of people are suspecting that Ash is actually a Klingon agent. And how beautiful would it be if she falls in love with Ash and Ash falls in love with her, and then she finds out that he's a Klingon, and she has got this deep-seated hatred of Klingons. And you know, that could actually add some interesting drama to it. And I would, but what if, because he falls in love with her, and if he is, I can't remember what's the name of the albino Klingon again.
I think it's
Volk. If he's Volk, and he falls in love with her, and he realizes that humans have worth, then maybe the two of them could try to bring the war to an end, and that could actually be interesting, you know. And so if they do something like that, then yes, their romance could serve a purpose. Right now, it just seems to be there just to be there, just like the whole thing with Stamets and the Doctor. You know, they threw that in there, and it's like, huh? What? Really? Okay. And the funny thing is that at the end of the one episode, they show them, you know, brushing their teeth together, and then all of a sudden he's just walking around the quarters saying, "Oh yeah, this is my partner," and it's like, then why were you being so coy about it last time? You know.
A human-raised, Ian May says, a human-raised Vulcan falling in love with a Klingon disguised as a human sounds complicated. Plus, she would never fall for it. But I tell you what, guys, here's what you really... Oh, you liked Stranger... We'll have to talk about that later. I didn't know you'd watched it. So we're going to...
I watched season 1. I'm like on episode 3 of season 2 now.
It stays consistent, in my opinion. But we're not going to get into that. What I will say, guys, is if you're watching this, why haven't you liked it? If you're watching it, why haven't you gone to twitter.com/Lore Reloaded and followed me on Twitter? There's 42 of you. You need to be watching me there. Hey, if you want to support the channel, you can become a sponsor. If I get 2 of those, I can make emojis. I'm going to make wondrous, just great emojis. You know, just wondrous emojis. People will love my emojis. Also, you can always support me at patreon.com/Lore Reloaded. It's because of viewers like you I'm able to continue to do this. But beyond that, don't forget to rate, comment, and subscribe. Guys, I want to thank you so much for watching the Lore Reloaded. At this point, we're now going to sit here and talk for a second so that it catches up, because it always cuts me off, and I always sit here and talk about how, you know, I got to do this, that, and the other, so that you can see the ending of the part about Lore Reloaded, and we just continue on, and Anti-Tracker looks there. Check out Anti-Tracker. Go to youtube.com/Anti-Tracker. Check him out. He's always fun. No, he's not at youtube.com/ Just put in Anti-Tracker. And guys, I want to thank you so much. I will see you on the next Lore Reloaded.